Hi, I'm Sam, and we've talked a lot in our past videos and on our website and our blog and stuff about how open source is really important to us, how we want to make our products open source. Um, so we thought we'd make a quick video today about what open source is and why we care so much about it. Open source is actually a very, very common thing. There are some really huge software projects that are open source. A main example of this, there are several, but I'll just give one, is the Android phone operating system, which is, as of like last year, the most popular phone operating system in the world, and it's developed by Google and released under an open source license. In order for something to be open source, it needs to fulfill a couple of requirements. The first one that I'm going to mention is that in order for something to be open source, you need to let people make derivatives off of what you've produced. So whether they take your software and make it do something new or make it do what it does differently or whatever, you have to let people do that. One of the ways that you have to enable people to do that, and this is the sort of the second category that you need to fulfill, is that you need to make the source code available. And source code for software is sort of like the blueprints for hardware. It's what the designers or developers or programmers actually interact with. And it's what allows them to take what you've created and build on it to evolve the product into something new and hopefully better. The third category that I'll mention is that you need to not impose any restrictions on how your works are redistributed. So if someone takes what you've made, makes modifications and whatever, and then decides to sell that commercially, that you have to be okay with that. You're not allowed to request a fee or a royalty off of their sales. You've given it away essentially, in this case, for free as in beer. So the final category that I'll mention is that you need to not discriminate against any individuals, groups, or sort of work uses for your product. So you can't restrict individuals' use, groups' use, so you can't prevent certain governments or other organizations from using your product, and you can't prevent it from being used in a field of use that you don't like. For example, if your stats package is being used by someone in stem cell research, you have to be okay with that. You can't prevent them from doing that. So in order to actually make something open source, you don't need to just like take all of these categories individually and like integrate them into your product somehow. You release it under one of the officially recognized open source licenses, and these are legal licenses that take all of these things into account. And they fulfill all of those categories, and there's also some sort of differences between them, such as whether or not the original author of something needs to be attributed, etc. So there's a bunch of other variations like that. So the biggest reason why we support open source in software and hardware and everything else is that we think it really promotes innovation, and it promotes evolution of technologies and products into something better by enabling whole communities of developers to work on something just for the sake that they care about it. Like Linux is probably the most commonly used operating system on the planet, and it's completely made by an international community of developers, and they're doing it because they care about it. There are some versions of Linux that are sold commercially, but most of Linux is just made by developers who care, and it's produced tremendous innovations over its lifetime, and I think it's a really fantastic example of why open source leads to innovation and evolution in technology. So that's our short description of what open source is and why we think it's awesome. Thank you for watching. Bye. So that's a brief description of what open source is and why we think it's awesome. And if that fly comes near to me one more time, I swear to God, so many takes have been ruined by that fly. Anyway.